of a show today. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting one. We are commemorating October the 7th. And today we'll be confronting a grim and deeply unsettling reality, one that has been tragically underreported. And as the world grapples with the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, a human induced humanitarian catastrophe, most of the vulnerable voices remain unheard. And joining me in a bit is Palestinian writer and activist Susan Abulhawa, who has witnessed firsthand the devastation and destruction that has ravaged Gaza since October the 7th. Susan's critical insights and her chilling calculations show that the official death toll we've been hearing, which is already heartbreaking, is vastly underestimated, and the true scale of the ongoing crisis, while the official numbers from Israeli military actions report over 37,000, Susan's estimates, based on rigorous analysis and mobility, healthcare collapse and conditions on the ground, reveal a much darker picture. And Susan is joining us live from London on our virtual platform. Susan, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media on a very morbid October the 7th, 1 year since those tragic events.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I think, first and foremost, before we get into your research and, the work that you've been doing, let's start maybe on the significance of October the 7th, on the general Middle East conflict that has been going on for such a long time. Why is October the 7th such a watershed moment? While we had the first and second Nakbas, but October the 7th feels I don't know, it feels quite different from historically what we've been witnessing.
Well, the difference is that for the first time in 75 years, Israelis took a hit. That's really the only difference. I mean, they've been killing us in far larger numbers for far, far longer and far more gruesomely, far more cruelly and barbarically. But our lives don't register in Western imagination and global media, and it's only when Israelis are killed or suffer at all that the world takes notice. And so that's the major difference. However, the political significance is that it kind of shattered this sense of Israeli invincibility. There is this assumption always that nothing can penetrate Israel's defenses, nothing can penetrate their surveillance, and of course that was shattered. And what followed was a further shattering of that. Sorry, there's a buzzing. Is that from me or you?
I'm not sure, but I think we'll find out. But then we can just continue.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But so there's a I think Israel expected that they would go in and just destroy everything, take over Gaza, push Palestinians into the Sinai, and all would be well, and they would colonize Gaza. I think that was what they fancied would happen. And there's some evidence to suggest that at least the upper echelons in Israel had wind of what was about to happen on October 7th, and they let it happen. And there's certainly a lot of evidence to support that theory. And I, for one, do believe that there was some prior knowledge. But they because, and the reason I believe that is because they have been talking about it for 20 years. They've been talking about basically exterminating us, transferring us. There's all kinds. I mean, it's been part of their political discourse, part of their social and academic discourse about the demographic threat, about our birth rate. I mean, our babies, basically, what a threat we are, just being there, and how to get rid of us. And there have been moments where they say, we need a defining moment. We need a 9/11. right? That was part of their discourse. And if you noticed, immediately after October 7th, they kept repeating, this is Israel's 9/11. And they expected, I think, to just be able to go in and do what the US did, destroy one society after another without a peep from the world. And it hasn't worked out quite as well as they thought, and they are quite literally. And I disagree with the previous guest who said that they've wiped out Hamas and Gaza. That couldn't be further from the truth. Hamas is still alive and well and active, and they are still resisting their soldiers on the ground. They're still killing them. They're still trying to repel them, and they are still falling. And Israel has not. The only thing Israel has succeeded in doing is slaughtering hundreds of thousands of civilians from Gaza to Beirut to Syria, and destroying civilian infrastructure, destroying universities, hospitals. I mean, there has the level of this kind of destruction of civilian life is literally unprecedented. There is no record of any country targeting hospitals to this extent, targeting universities to this extent. This is the largest cohort of pediatric amputees in history, in such a short period of time. I mean, there have been atrocities all throughout the world, and we know a lot of them have taken place in the United States, from the genocide of indigenous Americans and the enslavement of millions of Africans, and of course where you are, the atrocities over decades accumulated. But with that, in recorded history in such a short span of time, this may well be the most just sort of breaking all previous, I hate to say this word, records, I guess, of barbarity.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way you can put it, because looking at the numbers and just the sheer scale of destruction that we've witnessed since October 7th, it's exactly that. It's the amount of people killed. It's record breaking. Susan, you've witnessed Gaza's reality firsthand. I think it's always interesting hearing someone that has been to Gaza that's not from there, and you've been there twice. Could you maybe describe as vividly as you can what you saw on the ground, and ultimately how it has shaped your understanding of the scale of devastation that is not necessarily being reflected in official reports and what we hear from a lot of media agencies out there?
Yeah, I mean, I've written and talked quite a lot about this since my last trip. I was able to get into Gaza twice, and my plan was to return in July, but of course Israel took over the border and is not allowing anybody with a Palestinian background to get back in, and certainly not allowing people to come in with supplies as I was able to do previously. But and let me just preface what I'm, my description with the fact that nothing I can say can adequately describe the horrors that I witnessed, to be honest. I mean, I'm a writer, and I cannot find the right language, the right words to encompass the enormity of what's happening. I mean, I think we all see the sort of spectacular violence and the gore and the horror in videos, and that is, and what we see there is really just a tiny fraction of the totality of the gore. Every day, people are literally dying under the rubble, like suffocating. They're buried alive in the rubble. I mean, children, when they get pulled out, their lips are often blue. That means that they suffocated to death, that they were alive for at least 10 to 15 minutes, gasping, trying to figure out, how to get, basically just buried alive. There are tens of thousands of children who've died that way. There are tens of thousands of people under the rubble, still alive and dying slowly because nobody can get to them. People are digging with their hands. They're crawling into tight spaces. I mean, these are the Palestinian civil defense are the, in my view, just magnificent and heroic. And so are the doctors and healthcare workers in Gaza. But beyond this enormous violence and blood and maiming of bodies and shredding of bodies and burning of bodies and dismembering of bodies and decapitating of bodies, there is this massive just pain and anguish that's undergirding daily life. People who once had homes, who were planning, to go to universities, planning to start a business, planning to have children or get married or whatever. Everyone's ambitions, their greatest ambitions now have been reduced to just finding enough water for the day. There are people who have not bathed in months and cannot bathe. There's enormous, horrible skin diseases plaguing children, and everybody's concentrated into these tiny places. They're concentration camps, basically. They're forced to live on the beaches in sand, and with that comes all manner of insects, all manner of heat and misery. I mean, we've all been to the beach, and how the sand gets into everything, every orifice of your body, every bite of food you eat, and imagine being unable to escape that for a year. And then on top of that, Israel is still bombing tents. So there's this, despite this incredible daily dark anguish, there is this terror that never leaves. And if you can imagine what that does to developing brains, what that does to children who have been out of school now, this is their second year, going to second school year without schooling. Children have lost their parents. They're forced to work. They're begging in the streets. They're working. They're trying to get food to feed their families. Children as young as 6 and 7 have become the breadwinners because their parents are gone and they have to take care of their younger siblings. I mean, it's just enormous. It is enormous. I have never imagined even something so horrible could exist, and it's compounded by the small space. I mean, during the Nakba, the horror it lasted, and then people fled and took refuge, and they were able to live in to spread out to various countries, to begin to sort of reassemble their lives in some ways with some measure of safety. This has not happened in Gaza. People are literally on top of each other. You cannot walk anywhere without, you just bump into each other, bump into animals, bump into disease, and then the tents are crowded. The tents aren't just single family, sort of everybody gets a tent. It's not that way at all. People have large families, and so because the tents are not, there's not enough tents, so what happens is that all the women in one family will go into one tent, and all the men in one family will go into one. So families are actually separated from each other. When you need your spouse the most, you cannot hold them, and people have not touched. It's just, so you'll have 20 or 30 women in a tiny tent, basically sleeping, end to end next to each other in rows, packed in So even that, there's no respite anywhere. There's no privacy anywhere. There's no cleanliness anywhere. It just there's not enough food. There's not enough water. People are getting sick. There's no medicine. The hospitals are overrun. They are exhausted. They are depleted. There's no medicine. Um, you know, I don't even. There's just no words to describe the enormity of this horror. And of course, Israel is preventing international journalists from coming in, and the journalists on the ground are getting assassinated one by one, as you know. I mean, this again,
Yeah.
this is another, the largest cohorts of journalists in recorded history are being targeted as well. So they want us to be killed in the dark too. And this is, this is colonial designs. This is white supremacist, Jewish supremacist colonial designs. They want the gas offshore of Gaza. They want the shorefront properties in Gaza. They want Palestine. They want Arab lands without Arabs. That's it. And now they're talking about colonizing. They're literally renaming villages in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, and saying, oh, well, God gave us this. God promised us this 20. I mean, these people are monsters. They're lunatic. They're monsters. They're messianic, dangerous, terrible people who have to be neutralized. I mean, they have to be stopped.
And one thing that is stood out for me is you've mentioned in various reports that the official death toll, excuse me, doesn't include those who died from indirect consequences of this aggression, vile aggression by the Israeli occupying forces, but from indirect consequences like the lack of, as you mentioned, medicine, from starvation, or as you mentioned again, being buried under the rubble. Could you maybe explain how these deaths are being underreported and why it's so difficult to get the accurate number, by officials?
So, from the outset, when the Palestinian Health Ministry was still relatively intact, the only number they were counting, the only casualties they were counting were Palestinians who were killed by direct fire. So right away, the number was limited, and slowly, as Israel was bombing hospitals and information centers, they degrade, and also healthcare workers, right? They're killing everybody who worked in hospitals and administrators. So they degraded both the infrastructure as well as the human capital that was able to document and calculate these numbers. So that ability to calculate the number was degraded over time, and that number again was already quite limited. So that's the first point. The second point is because of the blackout and because of the restrictions on movements and the continued bombardment, nonetheless, a lot of people who were killed were buried by their loved ones without going through the healthcare system, so they were never counted. That's actually a large proportion, and we may never know the actual number, but it can be estimated. So there's that population. There's also a very large population of people who remain under the rubble, who were never retrieved, and we know they're under the rubble. Their families know they're under the rubble, and there's some documentation of a percentage. So that's another population of people who are dead. Now there's a very, very large population of Palestinians who died post fire, from days after, who were injured and died from their injuries later. Those are not always being counted because they don't end up going back into the healthcare system. And some of those people who do undergo treatment, who are dying from infections because there's not enough antibiotics or post-operative treatment in Gaza right now. So even people who get treatment. So that's a very large number of people who are also dying and dead. There is there's a large cohort of people who had chronic illnesses prior to the genocide. People with diabetes, with heart disease, with high blood pressure, um, people with cancer, with kidney disease, people who required treatments, regular treatments, regular medications, anti hypertensives, and anti-diabetic, insulin, and things like that, suddenly were cut off from these. And also people with asthma. There's no medication, and so they're dying from their illnesses, untreated illnesses. They are not being counted, but they are also victims of this genocide. There's a large cohort of people, children in particular, who are suffering malnutrition. There's a smaller population of them who are dying from malnutrition, basically starvation. But a much larger number of them are going to be disabled for the rest of their lives because of malnutrition. There's clear cognitive impairments in a lot of children, and there's children with certain genetic diseases who needed particular dietary requirements, like children who have PKU, who cannot digest an amino acid called phenylalanine, and they're basically slowly just becoming neurologically impaired because they don't have access to the food that they need. So there's so many levels of the death toll that's happening, and there's it's a small number, but it's a significant number of children who were dying of heart attacks. Now, when I was there, I learned of at least 5 children, and then after I returned, I learned of even more cases of small children who are dying of heart attacks because of the terror. And of course, people who are older and have heart issues or whatever are likewise dying of heart attacks because of the of the terror. I mean, to hear a bomb. I mean, there were a couple of close bombs that were dropped by Israel near where I was, and I was far enough. And they tell you if you hear them, you're going to be okay. Usually when you don't hear them is when you get hit. I don't really understand the physics of the phenomena, but that's the reality. But knowing that it wasn't near me, knowing that it wasn't me, the terror of hearing that is, your heart jumps out of your body. It's such a terrifying moment, despite despite knowing that you're okay. It's still terrifying. And so if you can imagine what that does to children, what it does to animals, what it does to older people, and then people have this constant elevated level of cortisol that never abates. And so it's just awful. I don't have words for it. There are just no words to describe it, honestly. It's hell. It is hell.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I just have one last question before I let you go. Many families, as you noted, have been forced to bury their loved ones without the formal recognition of hospital systems. How does this affect the collective memory of Gaza, number one, and number two, the international community's understanding of the human toll in this crisis?
There has to be an accounting, first of all. The international community, there are concerted efforts to not count the dead properly, and I think that's one thing. And I'm actually trying, and I know some other people are trying to push for an actual investigation of the death toll and to account for these lives. And we're going to do our job as writers to document this moment in history, and the world has to do that as well, because this, honestly, Gaza is is not just affecting us, and it will not. The outcome of this moment is going to affect world order for generations to come. If these monsters are allowed to succeed in their aims of colonizing more land, of displacing more people, and just burning the scorched earth policy of just and just creating this world where the strong get to do whatever the hell they want, and we are powerless to oppose them. This, it's like Chris Hedges said, one day we will all be Gaza. And this is, I believe this to be true. And I also want to I want to end on a moment of actually optimism, because despite this carnage and despite this darkness and despite this horror, I do believe that Israel will not succeed. I don't know when that's going to happen, but Israel is an anachronism, and it cannot be sustained in this world. This kind of barbarity and white supremacy and Jewish supremacy has no place in the world, and I believe that humanity is and will continue to reject this. And just like it seemed in South Africa that the odds were insurmountable, and you came out on the other side of it, I believe we will too, and the world will too, and we are and will remain eternally grateful for the solidarity from South Africa and your stand with us. It is ingrained in our DNA, in the Palestinian memory, in the Palestinian DNA, forever, and it has further entrenched the notion that South Africa has become the moral capital of the world, as far as I'm concerned. Despite I know you still suffer. I know the things that still plague South Africa, and I know you are far from being free in the way that you should be, from the legacies of what you endured. But you are and remain a moral beacon for the world, because South Africa singularly initially stood up and in a very powerful way and said, no, we will not be silent. So
no, thank you so much, Suzanne. We're going to leave it on that note. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Great, thank you. Bye.
There you have it. That was a Palestinian writer and activist, Suzanne, and just giving us a harrowing experience of her time in Gaza, and unpacking the underreporting of the deaths there. I think that's a really, really important element. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we continue with our special live broadcast commemorating October the 7th.